So, did anybody watch the coronation yesterday? I didn't. I was at Scott's birthday party barbecue last night, and someone said that they started watching at 7:00 in the morning. So they PVR'd it from 4:00 until 7. They said that those horses went up that pathway so fast when they fast-forwarded it through it. Anyway, so I didn't watch the coronation, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things that were different this time. First time in coronation history that these two things happened. Well, actually, one happened and one didn't happen. So the first one is that Charles III is not defender of the faith. So that was not part of the coronation yesterday. Charles is not defender of the faith. And the second thing that happened is that prayers were offered by non-Anglicans, actually by non-Christians. Both of these things are important. They recognize the vast diversity of what is still the Commonwealth, once called the British Empire. And it's really important to me this morning as I reflect on this particular passage, because it's another one of those passages. Last week I told you that Jesus, as the shepherd, the I am statements for me are kind of difficult. They challenge me to think about my theology and how I fit these pieces into my theology. Because here we heard Jesus say, when asked, he says, by Philip, I think. Philip says, how do we know the way? How do we know how to get to where you're going? And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. Now, I actually boast at times about this congregation. Well, I actually boast about this congregation a lot. When in 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul says love is not boastful, that's a place where I kind of waver. Because I am boastful. I'm boastful about a lot of things, but I'm boastful about this congregation. And one of the things that strikes me about this congregation that is different from other congregations, other churches, is that we were able to sponsor 33 refugees, or be part of the sponsorship of 33 refugees who came from Syria, all of whom were Muslim, and not have any expectation that they would somehow convert miraculously once they landed on Canadian soil, they would convert to Christianity. That we've actually supported them. We've gone to mosque with both Omars. We've gone to mosque with a few of the kids who moved to Mississauga. We've mourned with them. We've mourned when Omar's mother died. We mourned when the father of the kids in Mississauga died. We went to mosque and mourned with them. We were welcomed. I mean, Cheryl was actually called to be the mother for one of the births, and she went in collar. And so walked into the room of a Muslim mother and was introduced as my mother in her collar. So that's just kind of that's where we are. But then what do we do with this phrasing that Jesus uses that can be heard and read as being very exclusionary? Right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. And I struggle with that. But here's where I've landed. Because I think there's a truth here. I haven't fully parsed it out, and I may try and do that, over the next 20 or 30 years. But One of the gifts of Christianity one of the great gifts of Christianity, one of the great gifts of Jesus to humanity is the sense of God not only like omniscient and distant, but God so intimate, a God so intimate that he calls him Father. No other faith, look, try and find it. Nowhere else are you going to find such a profound, intimate relationship as that Jesus introduces to us as with God as Father. And Jesus doesn't hold off to say, like, God is my Father. No. Jesus says, when you pray, our Father, our Father. And not only our Father, those who call ourselves, like, God is not only our God, right? John 3:16, God first so loved the world that he gave up his only begotten Son. So that's another sermon, only begotten Son. That's another. But God is our God and our Father. If you want a relationship with God that is that relationship with God, then the way to the Father is through Jesus. The way into that relationship with God is through the gospel, through the good news that Jesus proclaims, that Jesus offers to us. It's a relationship that is, in the words of Jeremiah, as close as a breath, a hair away. A relationship, according to Jeremiah again, where God's word is written on our hearts. A relationship where God is parent to us. Nowhere else. You're not going to find it. It's our gift. It's Jesus' gift to us, and our gift as a church to the world. We invite people into that relationship with God. That does not mean, and here's where, I can get into trouble with ecumenical friends. It does not mean that it is the only way. Jesus actually said, so if we listen to the stories that Jesus tells, Jesus holds up the story of Naaman. He holds up the story of a Syrophoenician woman. He holds up all of these different stories where, in the end, none of the characters that come out on top of the story are Christian for sure, because there was no such thing. But they're not, usually they're not even Jewish. They're not part of that lineage. So he talks about the fact that the prophets came and the miracles were performed for pagans without expectation. And here's the really important part for me. Without expectation that they would convert to anything other than what they were. The expectation is that they would be the best whatever they can be. I had a prof once who said that my responsibility as a Christian is to help others to become the best whatever their faith is that they can be. I also had a prof who said, this image I have kept with me since seminary. He said, my feet are firmly planted in Christianity. My feet are firmly planted in Christianity, which means, so I'm rooted in my faith, which means I can, my branches, I can kind of go off and see what's happening in other traditions, in other faiths, because there is something to learn. There is something to learn from the meditation practices of Buddhists. There is something to learn from the Eightfold Path and from the four basic truths. There is something to learn from Jainism. There is something to learn, for me, there is something to learn from Judaism. There's something to learn from Islam. Islam, translated, is peace. So there's something to learn from a tradition that calls itself peace. My feet are firmly planted in Christianity, which means I can walk with a brother or a sister of another faith tradition. I can have conversations with them on my own road to Emmaus and hear how their story impacts and increases my own faith, without fear that somehow I'm going to, just by touching a Muslim, that somehow it's going to infect me, which, in that language, is the language of some. When we hear this passage, and really, I'm serious. It's going to take me 30 years to really unpack this and to parse it out. But when we hear this passage, it's an invitation into that intimate relationship that Jesus offers us. That intimate understanding of a God who created the universe, but created you and said, my creation is not complete without you. My family, God says, is not complete without you. Now, any of us who have lost a member of our family knows what that means. My family is not complete without you. And I will tell you that today. For me, my family is not complete without you. And that's fine. Right? I mean, I'm me. I'm like a guy. But God is saying to you today that God's family is not complete without you. How awesome is that? How incredible is that? That the God who numbered the sands on the beaches, the God who numbered the stars in the sky, the God who numbered the hairs on my head, and that number's going down every day. But that God is not complete without you. And that's today's passage. That if we want that relationship with God, and there are other relationships with God. There are relationships with God where God is like the ultimate judge, and that every little thing that we do is a tick against us in the book of life, and every good thing he erases some of those ticks, and like there's that model. But Jesus offers us this model. A model that says, my life, God's family is not complete without you. And that there is nothing that can separate us from that love. That's the other big piece of this. Nothing can separate us from the love of that God. And if we need to really reflect on that, those of us who are parents, think about your kids. What is it that your child, or more importantly, your grandchild, what is it that they could do that would ever end your relationship with them, that would cause you to end your relationship with them. And I'm going to say that the answer to that question, from my own experience, is nothing. There is nothing that could possibly close the door that tightly. And to use an axiom that Jesus used often, if that's true of me, and if that's true of you, who are human and by nature sinful, how much truer can it be of a God who is love? I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one can come to the Father except through me. If the relationship you want with God is the one that I've just described, only so much more glorious because I'm confined by the limits of language, if that's the relationship you want with God, then Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the entryway to that relationship with God. And me, having considered, I wasn't firmly Christian, and those of you who know some of my story will know this. I wouldn't have identified myself as firmly Christian until I had already been in ministry in the United Church. I was called into ministry in the United Church not knowing if I was a Christian. But through my experience of the church and my experience of the gospel and my experience of the offer of that relationship and my acceptance of that relationship, I can now say, convicted and confirmed, that my feet are firmly planted in Christianity. That I am a Christian because that's the relationship I want with God. I want a God who, when I fall and scrape my knee, is willing to pick me up and carry me for a bit. I want a God who, when I really mess up bad, and trust me, I do, and have, I want a God who says, come back home. I want a God who sets the table and knows that my favorite dessert is sugar pie and has it waiting. I want a God who knows me that intimately and loves me that deeply, that there is nothing I could do to separate myself from them. And that is what this morning's passage is about. An invitation to that relationship. And since it's ours, we can say, thanks be to God. Amen.